Within Carl Jung's psychological framework, humanity operates across two distinct realms, the external environment and the profound internal landscape. The persona acts as your social camouflage, functioning as a necessary boundary between the conscious ego and the expectations of society to help you navigate the outside world. However, the true psychological journey initiates the moment you turn inward toward the vast, uncharted expanses of the unconscious mind. In these hidden depths, you will confront a host of formidable forces: the shadow, the anima, the animus, and the self, each possessing a dual nature of light and darkness. The shadow emerges directly from the personal unconscious, built entirely from the repressed or ignored experiences accumulated throughout your life. Unless you willingly acknowledge these obscure traits as an authentic part of your identity, you will inevitably cast them outward, effectively transforming the surrounding world into a mirror of your own unrecognized flaws. Engaging in shadow work remains an absolute prerequisite for genuine self-discovery, despite the intense psychological resistance it inevitably provokes. While the shadow fundamentally mirrors your own gender, peering deeper into the psyche reveals contrasexual elements that govern your projections regarding the opposite sex. This territory introduces the anima within men and the animus within women, complex figures that often lurk right behind the shadow and introduce exceptionally profound psychological dilemmas. Remaining oblivious to these inner counterparts is dangerous. A completely unexamined anima will seamlessly bond with your unintegrated shadow, amplifying your internal conflicts. Functioning as a complementary force, the anima embodies the entirety of feminine psychological qualities within a man, just as the animus encapsulates the masculine traits within a woman. Because these entities reside in the collective unconscious as ancient, autonomous archetypes, they constantly highlight whatever characteristics you consciously lack, making their integration a remarkably challenging endeavor. While your persona serves as a practical bridge to external society, the primary purpose of the anima and animus is to establish a vital conduit to the most unfathomable layers of your own psyche. Having established the foundational concepts of the persona, the shadow, and the collective unconscious, it is crucial to delve into the profound dynamics of the anima and animus. As Jung famously noted, if confronting the shadow is the work of an apprentice, then successfully navigating the anima represents the masterpiece of psychological development. Conquering the personal unconscious by integrating your shadow is merely the preliminary phase. Without achieving this baseline clarity, grasping the subtle realities of your contrasexual archetypes remains entirely impossible. Although the shadow frequently appears in mythology alongside the anima and animus, its roots lie in personal experience, rendering it relatively accessible to conscious awareness if you are willing to look. Conversely, the anima and animus operate at a profound distance from normal waking thought, remaining largely invisible under ordinary circumstances. Acknowledging their silent presence is a mandatory step, as they construct the essential pathway to the self, which represents the ultimate totality and harmony of your entire personality. In modern society, a man frequently overcompensates by hyper-identifying with his masculine persona, championing rigid rationality and external dominance, while allowing his feminine dimensions to wither in the dark. This intense fixation on the ego and the material world creates a tragic confinement, cutting him off from his inner vitality and guaranteeing toxic, unconscious projections of the anima. Women generally maintain a more organic connection to their internal realms, leading to distinct psychological friction between the sexes. This dynamic often causes men to fall prey to inexplicable, irrational moods, while women may fiercely defend seemingly irrational opinions. At their core, the anima channels the connective, maternal energy of Eros, whereas the animus embodies the structured, paternal principle of Logos. Through conscious integration, a man's anima grants him a profound capacity for relationship and empathy, just as a woman's animus equips her with the tools for incisive reflection, deliberation, and objective self-knowledge. Furthermore, while every individual harbors an eternal archetypal image of the opposite sex within their soul, the specific contours of these inner guides are heavily sculpted by your personal, lived interactions throughout your life. When exploring how these inner templates are projected onto living people, it is clear that a man's anima, his internal woman, is fundamentally molded by his earliest relationship with his mother. Should that maternal bond be fraught or damaging, his inner feminine figure frequently mutates into an engine of touchiness, relentless insecurity, and suffocating depression. This negative mother complex continuously whispers a destructive narrative into the man's soul, convincing him that his existence is meaningless and stripping away his capacity to find joy in everyday experiences. These suffocating mental states wrap existence in a bleak, oppressive shroud, sparking persistent anxieties about illness, failure, or tragedy, and can even spiral into a lethal despondency where the anima functions as a demon of death. Instead of fueling active participation in the world, a corrupted anima acts as a psychological vampire, draining your vital energy and replacing genuine living with hollow, passive fantasies. Ultimately, the archetypal image of woman acts as both the ultimate comfort against life's cruelties and the supreme illusionist, wielding the power of Maya to seamlessly weave hope and despair into the fabric of human existence. An even more insidious display of a negative anima reveals itself through participation in damaging cognitive games, typified by those pseudo-intellectual conversations that prevent a man from genuinely engaging with existence and making authentic choices. You will notice that such an individual contemplates existence so obsessively that he becomes entirely incapable of actually experiencing it. Young males, who find themselves dominated by their mothers, frequently seek refuge within the intellectual sphere, utilizing books and philosophical debates as a shield against maternal influence and animus pressure, under the assumption that these are domains their mothers cannot comprehend. By retreating in this manner, he preserves a cerebral form of masculinity, while entirely forfeiting his primal essence, sacrificing both his grounded virility and his capacity for true creation. The vibrant energy of decisive action, the robust masculinity that grasps reality and shapes it like clay, is abandoned because confronting the real world proves far too daunting, prompting his flight into theoretical musings. However, this brand of philosophy is entirely devoid of profound inquiry. These individuals harbor no authentic curiosities. For them, intellectualism devolves into a mere juggling of vocabulary and abstract theories, utterly stripped of any persuasive substance or genuine depth. In the same way that adverse maternal encounters can corrupt the anima, an excessive bond with the mother yields equally detrimental consequences. This dynamic often renders a man emasculated and highly susceptible to predatory women, leaving him woefully unequipped to navigate the inevitable adversities of daily life. Consequently, a maternal fixation fractures the anima, compelling the individual to idolize the concept of femininity to an unhealthy degree. He adopts a regressive lifestyle, retreating from the harsh realities of the external environment to perpetually seek shelter within the nurturing embrace of his childhood caretaker. This psychological state, commonly recognized as puer aeternus, or eternal youth, embodies the child-god archetype, whose darker facets include a subconscious urge to regress back to the maternal womb, a phenomenon you can easily observe today in the socially underdeveloped man-child who steadfastly refuses to mature. Conversely, this fractured state can simultaneously cause him to harbor a deep contempt for women, reducing them to mere instruments designed solely for the gratification of his sensual desires. The anima most commonly expresses itself through these erotic daydreams, which transform into obsessive compulsions, primarily when a man's emotional connections are neglected and his relational maturity remains stunted. Furthermore, an individual might project these internal anima characteristics outward, leading him to mistakenly perceive these generated traits as the inherent qualities of a specific, real-world woman. Indeed, it is the active influence of the anima that triggers the phenomenon of instantaneous infatuation, convincing a man upon a single glance that he has finally found his destined partner. Under these circumstances, he is overwhelmed by a profound sense of lifelong familiarity, succumbing to an infatuation so absolute that observers might easily mistake his devotion for sheer insanity. Much like the alluring water spirits in the German myth of the Lorelei, who utilized their enchanting melodies to draw sailors toward fatal destruction, the anima represents an illusory vision of romance, joy, and maternal comfort that actively distracts men from the tangible world. This projection extends beyond human partners, as men frequently attribute feminine qualities to inanimate objects, illustrated perfectly by the symbolic marriage between a captain and his vessel, a tradition that dictates he must perish alongside her should she happen to sink. Nevertheless, you must recognize that this inner feminine force encompasses far more than mere carnal desire, finding representation in universally recognized deities of feminine power, such as Cybele, the goddess of nature, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. The anima boasts a multitude of profoundly beneficial attributes, serving as a crucial mechanism that aligns a man's intellect with his truest internal principles, thereby granting him access to the most profound layers of his own psyche. A classic literary embodiment of this guiding function is Beatrice in Dante's Divine Comedy, who assumes the responsibility of leading the poet through the celestial realms following his harrowing journey across hell and purgatory. The maturation of this psychological entity occurs across 4 distinct developmental phases, beginning with the archetype of Eve, who perfectly illustrates primal, strictly biological and instinct-driven connections. Following this is a stage embodied by Faust's Helen, introducing an elevated romantic and artistic dimension that still retains noticeable erotic undertones. The third phase finds its ideal representation in the Virgin Mary, a persona that elevates earthly passion, or eros, into a realm of profound spiritual reverence and devotion. Finally, the ultimate stage is epitomized by Sapientia, representing a transcendent wisdom that surpasses even the highest ideals of purity and holiness. Although contemporary individuals seldom attain this peak of psychological evolution, the iconic Mona Lisa serves as a remarkably close approximation of this enlightened state. From a pragmatic standpoint, this internal guide asserts its positive influence when a person actively validates the emotions, shifting moods, and vivid daydreams generated by the anima, subsequently anchoring these ephemeral experiences into tangible mediums like literature, visual art, or musical scores. Once a previously formless imagination has been crystallized into a concrete expression, you must treat it as a legitimate reality, rather than dismissing it as a mere fabrication of the mind. By maintaining this dedicated practice consistently over an extended duration, the authentic journey of individuation initiates and blossoms, allowing you to successfully drag hidden unconscious elements out into the light of the real world. Ultimately, it is crucial to understand that the depths of the unconscious mind remain infinite and can never be permanently conquered or fully exhausted. The fundamental objective behind Jung's analytical psychology is the realization of a completely integrated personality, a feat accomplished by persistently migrating hidden psychological material into active awareness through a continuous, lifelong pursuit of individuation and harmony with the self. Making the arduous yet fundamentally straightforward choice to deeply respect your own emotional currents and imaginative visions is the only method to avoid the total paralysis of your internal growth, as this commitment alone reveals the genuine significance of this internal persona. Through this transformative process, the anima reverts to her fundamental essence, the woman within, who holds the responsibility of transmitting essential communications directly from the core of the self. A compelling historical illustration of this dynamic is the Scottish author William Sharp, who secretly authored works using the feminine alias Fiona MacLeod for nearly the entirety of his existence. Channeling his focus toward natural landscapes and Celtic mythology, he composed literature directly from the depths of his spirit, utilizing the vocalization of this primordial life archetype. Whenever an individual is brimming with vitality, they are quite literally animated by this force, empowering them to articulate profound truths that their external, superficial persona would be entirely incapable of expressing. The author recognized that his literary creations were not entirely his own independent work. He literally exchanged correspondence with Fiona, receiving replies that established them as distinct entities in a profound psychological manifestation of anima integration. While the esteemed poet William Butler Yeats admired Fiona's output, he held little regard for the works produced under the name William Sharp. In a parallel psychological framework, the animus functions as the man within, embodying every masculine psychological trait present within a woman, demonstrating both beneficial and detrimental characteristics. Rather than manifesting as a romantic daydream or fleeting emotion, this inner masculine force usually surfaces as an unshakable, seemingly sacred certainty regarding one's personal beliefs. A classic refrain endlessly echoing in the minds of women gripped by this archetype might sound like a desperate plea for unrequited love, or a cynical conclusion that only two terrible options exist in any given scenario. Much like a mother molds her son's anima, a father profoundly shapes his daughter's animus. This paternal influence grants the animus an arsenal of absolute, indisputable convictions, rigid beliefs that entirely ignore the woman's actual, lived reality. When its negative traits dominate, the animus isolates a woman from genuine interpersonal connections, enveloping her in a web of unrealistic fantasies and rigid judgments about how the world should operate. This detachment from practical reality is vividly illustrated in the legend of Bluebeard, a tale that perfectly symbolizes this destructive inner force, hoarding murdered wives in a clandestine room. After marrying anew, he forbids his bride from opening the specific door concealing his gruesome secret, yet she inevitably yields to her inquisitiveness. Through this dark lens, the animus embodies the calculating, ruinous thoughts that can consume a woman, potentially driving her to harbor lethal intentions toward those around her. By quietly nurturing these toxic mindsets, a wife might unconsciously push her spouse, or a mother her offspring, toward physical illness, tragic accidents, or premature mortality. Alternatively, she could covertly sabotage her children's romantic prospects, a profound malice that barely registers in her waking awareness, beautifully illustrated by an elderly woman who once told me she preferred her son having drowned at 27 over losing him to a daughter-in-law. This buried animus perspective can also induce a bizarre emotional paralysis or an overwhelming sense of inadequacy. From the deepest corners of the psyche, it murmurs discouraging lies, insisting that your efforts are futile, you are fundamentally broken, and your circumstances will never improve. Possessing a parasitic quality identical to its feminine counterpart, the animus often sustains itself by draining the vitality of others. A woman dominated by this force morphs into an emotional vampire, entirely lacking internal vibrancy and desperately siphoning life force from anyone she encounters, as this demonic inner masculine extinguishes all feminine grace. Tragically, when you are seized by either the anima or the animus, the resulting thoughts and emotions feel entirely like your own authentic reactions. Your ego becomes so completely entangled with these psychological invaders that you lose all objective distance, only realizing with absolute dread, once the spell breaks, that your words and actions completely contradicted your genuine values. Yet, this internal entity is not exclusively defined by harshness, impulsivity, vacant rhetoric, or stubborn malice. It possesses immense constructive potential, perfectly capable of forging a vital link to the self through profound creative endeavors. Should you manage to recognize and understand this inner figure, the Animus transforms into a priceless ally, gifting you with masculine virtues like decisive initiative, bravery, impartial judgment, and profound spiritual insight. This inner man progresses through 4 distinct evolutionary phases, initially materializing as raw physical might, perhaps envisioned as a muscular athlete or champion. Subsequently, it develops the capacity for deliberate planning and proactive execution before evolving into the Word during its 3rd stage, frequently taking the form of a learned professor or spiritual guide. Ultimately, the Animus becomes the pure embodiment of meaning, operating as a conduit for transcendent religious experiences that profoundly reframe your existence. This intricate interplay between the anima and the animus is absolutely essential for the journey of individuation. Jung characterized the anima as the fundamental archetype of life itself, while designating the animus as the ultimate archetype of meaning, frequently citing the syzygy, a divine, sacred matrimonial union, as a universal paradigm mirrored in deities like Shiva and Shakti, or Zeus and Hera. While the anima generates psychic imagery and pulls it from the depths of the unconscious, the animus interprets these symbols, grounding them with significance in your conscious, external reality. Facing this unconscious realm functions as a dynamic form of meditation, a word tracing back to the Latin meditatio, meaning to deeply reflect, which holds profound therapeutic power. As a 17th century alchemical text described, it is a silent dialogue with an unseen presence, akin to communing with a divine spirit, a guardian angel, or your own soul. By consciously interpreting, documenting, and illustrating our dreams, we assimilate these profound unconscious symbols, paying special attention to the archetypal dreams born from the collective unconscious, typically explored through Jung's foundational techniques of amplification and active imagination. To intensify the significance of your nocturnal visions, a technique known as amplification draws upon historical, cultural, and mythological parallels. Carl Jung referred to this surrounding context as the psychological tissue that anchors a specific image, primarily because he wished to prevent the analytical process from deteriorating into purely subjective guesswork. Throughout his career, the famed psychiatrist analyzed approximately 80,000 dreams, ultimately recognizing consistent patterns that firmly supported his theory of the collective unconscious. When you engage in active imagination, you isolate a meaningful fragment of a fantasy, deeply reflecting upon it while organically allowing additional buried elements to surface. Your primary objective here is to fuse these previously hidden psychological components with the already recognized narrative of your documented dream. You will often notice that highly vivid, recurring nocturnal visions gradually lose their intensity and frequency once you actively acknowledge their underlying messages. Essentially, the symbolic narratives playing out in your sleep are deeply rooted fantasies, actively striving for conscious recognition. As you inevitably encounter these personified elements of your buried psyche, you must avoid interrogating them regarding everyday matters or your conscious ego, focusing instead strictly on your internal spiritual landscape. You should never dismiss this symbolic inner realm as frivolous make-believe, because genuine imagination inherently strives to magnify your awareness of reality. Engaging in this profound psychological exercise serves as a direct mechanism for broadening the very horizons of your conscious mind. Ultimately, the pursuit of individuation drives you to uncover your authentic self, allowing you to establish a unique personal identity while maintaining healthy connections with those around you. You will experience this transformative journey as a sequence of challenging interactions, constantly negotiating between the external environment, your social relationships, and the hidden domain of archetypes. A critical milestone in this development requires men to become acutely aware of their anima and women of their animus, ensuring you can distinguish your true self from these powerful forces rather than falling under their control. Deep within you, autonomous psychological entities anticipate being entirely ignored, and their genuine reality causes them to fiercely resent such profound neglect. Exploring this territory reveals a surprisingly vibrant ecosystem of thoughts, emotions, and impulses thriving inside you, defying all prior expectations of what was internally possible. Naturally, these profound internal realities appear completely absurd to anyone lacking direct personal exposure, especially since the average individual confidently assumes they possess complete mastery over their own mind. This naive certainty is overwhelmingly standard among typical people, meaning you cannot genuinely comprehend the true essence of the anima or animus without undergoing the challenging work firsthand. By embracing these deep reflections and successfully applying them in your daily life, you cross the threshold into a fundamentally unprecedented realm of psychological discovery. Once you achieve this breakthrough, you will be profoundly humbled by the vast expanse of information that your waking ego completely fails to grasp and has never truly understood. Achieving such an elevated level of self-awareness remains an exceptionally scarce accomplishment in our modern era, and you will typically find that its acquisition requires suffering through severe emotional distress or an intense neurotic crisis beforehand.